Chapter 4, Elasticity. In this video, we're going to look at a varying type of demand line, and we're going to see demand lines which are what we call elastic or inelastic. Remember that all demand lines are downward sloping. They have a negative relationship between price and quantity, but the slope of that demand line can vary. So if you're looking at a demand curve, the rule of thumb is that if the demand curve is flatter or closer to horizontal, that demand line is going to have a large elasticity. And if your demand line is downward sloping but closer or steeper, closer to vertical, you're going to have a smaller elasticity, or what we call closer to inelastic. So here's an example. If the demand line is completely vertical, this would be a very extreme case. We call this a perfect inelastic demand. This would mean that regardless of what the price is doing, and here I have price going down, regardless of how far down that price goes, literally the exact same amount of customers will buy it regardless of whether the price is high or low. So your elasticity here is 0. This is really extreme and probably not true to real life. This is an example of a more typical inelastic demand line. You have a downward sloping demand line here, but it's pretty close to vertical. It's fairly steep. And here we dropped price. If we drop this price by 10%, you'll notice that quantity demanded did not go up by more than 10%. It went up by something smaller than 10%. And so your elasticity is going to be underneath 1. And because of that, we call this an inelastic demand line or an inelastic market. If your demand line is right in the middle, meaning a change in price by a certain percentage leads to the exact same change in quantity demanded, we call that unit elastic, and your elasticity will equal 1. Here we have a more elastic demand line. This is a downward sloping demand line, but it's closer to horizontal. Here, if we drop the price by 10%, the quantity demanded was going to rise by something more than 10%. That's going to give you an elasticity higher than 1. And so this is what we call an elastic demand or an elastic market. And again, if we have a very extreme example of a perfectly elastic demand line, this basically means that the price stays the same and all sorts of customers, infinity amounts of customers, are going to want to buy it at this particular price. Again, this gives you an elasticity of infinity, but this is pretty unrealistic to what a real life scenario would look like.